Welcome to Optimal Game State. Today, we're back looking at the Cities of Sigmar warbands. Last time, we went through the big release, which was the new human range. This week, we're going to be looking at the Dwarfs, or Duardin, as some might call it. Now, Wargames on Toast did recently cover this warband, and I do recommend checking out that video to see his take on things. I do think this warband is particularly relevant right now, though, as we've just had the release of Warhammer the Old World. So we're about to see the minis for this warband make a comeback. To a certain extent, these Short Kings have been a little hard done by. When GW ended the old wargame and started the Age of Sigmar, these dwarf models were rolled in with the Empire and a bunch of elves into kind of a holding pattern. GW would keep selling the minis, and we could keep playing with them as part of the Cities of Sigmar, but these dwarfs weren't really supported as a faction. Now, at this stage, we do have 3 other dwarf warbands currently. The Fire Slayers, who I don't have much experience with, I have to admit. The Caradron Overlords, who are absolutely fantastic, partially due to their cheap privateers, excellent abilities, and fantastic range options. And more recently, we've had the Vulcan Flame Seekers, who are a different take on the Fire Slayers and are a really, really good single box warband. Now, in the story of the Age of Sigmar, the dwarfs thrived during the Age of Myth. There's this big Khazalid empire, which was a massive Duardin nation that stretched across all 8 realms at its height. Typically, they built their cities, their carracks, in mountain ranges and underground, with the crafter god Grungni as their patron. They were renowned for their forges and their creations. This all ended with the Age of Chaos, when the ruinous powers ravaged across realms. As the cities of the Khazalid Empire fell, the survivors sought refuge where they could. But their cousin Duardin of the Fire Slayers, who were dwarfs who followed the warrior god of Grimnir, they turned them away. Some survivors found refuge in Azir, the realm of heaven, but that soon closed its gates, locking it away from the rest of the realms. Other survivors found sanctuary in the air and grew to become the Caradron Overlords, although they were very bitter at what they saw as Grungni abandoning them. These days they trust their science and magic more than any god. It's likely a few dwarf clans managed to survive the Age of Chaos in one of the realms, but it would have been pretty rough going for them. Now, Sigmar has opened the gates of Azir again, and the descendants of the Khazalid Empire have returned to the realms as what are now known as the Dispossessed. They can be found in most of the great cities, aiding where they can. Remember, the Stormcast were created for Sigmar by Grungni, so the Duardin and the Dispossessed are a key part of the realms. After Grungni completed that great work of the Stormcast, he once again disappeared. Those dwarves who still follow him believe he has been crafting something that will restore their empire once again, and there are rumours of his return abound. Now, of course, we have the weird situation where all of these models are about to get released again as Warhammer the Old World is out and about, and we're expecting a big box packed with dwarfs in the next few months. Yes, it is all going to be square-based, and Warcry is round-based, but that's really just a detail. You can play with square bases just fine for your casual games of Warcry, and if you really wanted to get the best of both worlds, you could round-base them, so they'll be perfect for Warcry, and then use movement trays adjusted for the units, which would let you play it as big ranked files in the old world. The key part here is that the models are back, so let's see what we can do. Starting with the plots, like I always like to do, as with all dwarf warbands, it's notable that we've got pretty much 3 move across the board. So apart from that, they should be relatively competitive. We can say that that is the case for the Hammerer and maybe the Keeper at the Gate, but nothing really notable apart from that when looking at the damage side of things. Similarly, when it comes to wounds, there is a trend towards the top, but nothing in particular really stands out. We also have a relatively tight spread. The cheapest seems to be about 75, and it looks like it goes up to 160 if we exclude the gyro bomber and the gyrocopter. So pretty much everything is in that mid-range area, which is often kind of considered to be a kind of a cursed area. Not necessarily a great start, but we'll see how it goes. There are 3 abilities any fighter in this warband can use. The first is the reaction Grudge Bearers. If a dwarf is about to die and has an action to trigger this ability, then another fighter, and that doesn't have to be line of sight or range limits or have to be a dwarf or anything, they get a free action. That's pretty good. In a game with 4 turns, you essentially get 8 actions per fighter. Killing a fighter means they don't get those actions, but this reaction takes that sting off that a little. Also, if they end up killing a cheap dwarf and you happen to have an expensive ally, you're trading up the value of that action significantly. Next up, we have the double Grim Last Stand. This reduces damage from hits and crits by 1 that hit your fighters within 3 inches of the acting fighter, but only if they haven't moved. Since it's just a double, it's not crazy to stack it with 2 fighters using the ability, which could make it super hard to shift them off an objective. Then we have the double Over My Dead Body. This is for objective control and means the dwarf using it counts as an additional 2 when contesting an objective. The wording is a little clunky, but I believe it means that the dwarf will count as 3 bodies. I suspect that it is phrased like that because we can't take a wait action and then use it again, and that dwarf will then count as 5 bodies for controlling an objective. As a double, again, it's not unreasonable to get 2 of these in a turn, which could be key for holding objectives. All pretty thematic. The Duardin are hard to kill, hold their ground, and hold a grudge. It suggests this is going to be a pretty good warband at holding objectives and contesting them, but maybe not as much at getting kills. I'm going to start first with the Iron Warden. At 160 points, this is the most expensive leader in the faction. That 3.6 average damage is pretty good once you realize that it is ranged. So he can stand and do 7 damage to a target. Wounds are a little low for the points, so you're paying a pretty big premium for that 15 range, but it's still solid. We looked at the Fusilier in the Castilian host last time round, and this is 40 points more for a significant jump in damage. As a bonus, there is a nice but very situational ability, Flesh Melding Torrent. We're going to see a lot of strength and toughness based abilities with Warband, and unfortunately they are of limited use. We're going to be using the ranged attack weapon as much as we can, and that already has a chunky 5 strength. For any target with 4 or lower toughness, the ability doesn't actually make any difference. So much of the time we're probably better off holding that triple of something else. As an aside, the model is from the Dwarf Ironbreaker box, which can be built as Iron Drakes or Ironbreakers, and this guy is a leader of the Iron Drakes. Our second hero is a personal favourite of mine, the Warden King. As I understand it, this is one of the last few releases for the Old World, and this was Belagar Ironhammer, the true king of Carrick 8 Peaks. It's a nice plastic kit that I really enjoyed putting together and painting. Profile-wise, it's pretty straightforward, just some solid numbers. He's chunky with wounds, damage is above what you'd like for that point range. 5 toughness makes him pretty hard to kill, although that 3 move will make it tricky for him to get into position. The ability is a quad, which often means you can ignore it, but with that range of 6 inches, it's a pretty big bubble and could give a lot of free move to a lot of your fighters. That could be a lot of actions, and action efficiency is always great. Honestly, though, the model is enough for me. If you're a fan of the Dwarf and you haven't picked up this model, I very, very much recommend it. Next up, we have the Cogsmith. While he does have a gun and the ability does boost it, the melee damage is much better in this case. Moving and attacking is going to be worse than shooting twice, though, which is something I do like to see. That said, I feel like this fighter is a bit too stretched across both weapons. Rather than having a great melee or a great range, we just got an okay version of each. The ability boosts the strength of the ranged attack, but the attack is already strength 4, so again, it's going to be pretty limited. Unfortunately, not one of the ones I'm a bit of a fan of. Then we have Keeper of the Gate, who is the leader from the Hammerers. Now, the average damage here of 6 is fantastic. We'd expect that in a 150 point fighter. Although, again, that's not too surprising because that movement 3 typically gives about a 20% points discount. The ability is a bit of a weird one. It's a combo between Rush and Onslaught. Usually you want to Rush when you're double moving because you're going to get +1 move on each of those 2 moves. And you want to Onslaught when you're double attacking. Again, you're getting +1 attack in each of those. Kingsguard for the double gives it the extra option of being useful when you want to move and attack. It does require a hero to be in melee for that extra attack, but it can be any of your heroes on the board, so it doesn't have a range limitation. You don't have to be near them or anything. Reading it, I suspect if you're trying to move your Keeper of the Gate into combat, maybe it's not going to work, because at the point of triggering the ability, so before you move, he's not in melee, so I don't think you'll get the +1. But I could be wrong on that particular one. I would love to be wrong on that particular one. Now, that said, it is very limited in usefulness. It's only really a bonus when the 3-inch move wouldn't get you into combat anyway, because otherwise you could just move the 2 inches or 3 inches and then use Onslaught to get your extra dice. Still, it is a pretty nice profile overall, and you get all of the normal Dispossessed abilities. The leader of the Longbeards is the Old Guard. Wounds are good for points, but damage is a little low. Toughness is 5, so this is a super chunky model. The ability is a double back in my day. This is a damage boost, which is definitely something we've been looking for, but again, we're looking at a strength bonus. As we said, depending on the fighter and the opponent, this can be a good damage boost, but it can also be very situational. In the case of the Old Guard, note that it does say other, so it's not going to work on him. But if someone else used it next to him, it would improve damage by 1.3 against T4, which is still a little bit better than adding Onslaught. But yeah, you kind of want to be able to stack these across multiple ones before you kind of get value out of it. At the same price point, we get the Rune Lord. Damage is similar, and we lose 1 toughness but get 4 wounds. The ability is a double Forge Fire, which is unique to the Rune Lord. Again, we boost the strength, but in this case, we get to pick a target within 9 inches, and they get the strength bonus until the end of the round. This will obviously be super good if we have a powerful fighter who's going to benefit from it, and you are able then to stack bonuses with it. So you can use Forge Fire on a target, and then that target can then use Onslaught or whatever it wants to use itself. This might be a good option as an ally for another warband, and the Rune Lord is also going to be super useful if you bring a powerful ally into a Dispossessed warband. As an aside, this is another plastic kit, like the Warden King. I didn't realize it until putting together this video, but the kit does have 2 different heads, and the options are between a book or hammer and a staff or a tongs holding a blazing rune. So again, this does look like one of those really, really good modern miniatures, but still that kind of classic style. Okay, this is the Ironbeard, who is the leader of the Iron Breakers. Surprisingly, it's a range fighter with a pistol and a Cinderblast bomb. Damage is decent, but relatively short range. The ability is a weird one. It gives a Duardin fighter with Bulwark, so in this case, this one, and as we'll see later, the standard Ironbreakers, it will give them 2 free moves, but they have to end up within 1 inch of this fighter, and they cannot move after that. Now, the range on it's 6. These guys can move 3, so that should be relatively straightforward. If they're in range, they can move directly to them. But yeah, it is very limited. It'll probably favor melee units looking to push together into melee, maybe. Arguably, you could run 3 of these guys, so 3 Ironbeards, although they will be tricky to get because, I believe it's 1 as a leader per box. But if you had the models for them, you could run 3 of them. The first Ironbeard moves up his 6 inches and then uses the double to pull up the next Ironbeard to him. That Ironbeard then activates, gets to shoot twice, and then uses the double to pull up the third one, who then gets to shoot twice. So in theory, that chain of Ironbeard shooters ended up with 6 move actions and 4 shoot actions after spending 2 doubles. Not bad. And that was all of the heroes. The most expensive non-hero fighters are the 2 gyrocopters, starting with the bomber. Now, personally, I have to admit, I think I'm relatively biased against these guys. So to get some context, I went over and pulled up the profile for Crypt Flare, which is a model I quite like. It costs 235, has the same move and toughness, and 3 more wounds. It only has a single attack profile, so it doesn't have range, and that averages out to 5.33, slightly better than the Gyro Bomber. There are, of course, abilities to factor in, but with that perspective in mind, this profile doesn't actually seem too bad. We don't get any special abilities, so it just has the standard warband abilities. It's not a mount or a beast, so no negative traits. That probably makes for some weird interactions, as it can open doors and fly inside buildings as long as a 50mm base will fit inside. So it's a bit of a shame it doesn't have a cool special ability, but at least the ranged weapon is a bit of a bonus. The 5 damage isn't terrible. It is very fast. It is quite tough. So you could use this as a mid problem solver. So you're going to move it over, get on top of something, do 5 damage, maybe add in some buffs if you can from some leader abilities, and hope it can get some work done. Anyway, the gyrocopter is very, very different in comparison. It is a downscale version of the same. It's a little cheaper and a little faster, but the damage profiles are where the hit take is taken. I suspect it's probably a bit too low damage to actually kill much. It does have a lot of wounds and is super fast with fly though. So it can move 24 inches in a turn and then use Over My Dead Body ability to count 3 fighters on an objective. Or you could pick up a treasure. That will mean it'll lose fly and it gets -2 move, but that's still going to be 10 move, which could be fine for keeping it safe. So this is probably a really good objective piece. All right. After the copters, we have 5 fighter profiles, which are the rank and file warbands. All are within this 85 to 75 point range, so we are going to see a lot of similarities across them. The first one we have here is the Hammerers. These are the most efficient damage per points in the warband, so definitely worth taking a look at. All but the movement side of it, everything else is great numbers for the points cost. The ability, we've seen it already, the King's Guard one. It might be useful once in a while, but you are going to be taking these guys for their damage rather than anything else. Next up, we have the Arndrix, who are the range fighters. Unfortunately, the numbers here are pretty terrible. The range is 12, which is decent, but doing 1.6 average damage for 85 points isn't really great. Triple, as we've seen, can help, but the attack still caps out at 2.3 average damage, so it's probably an upward, to be honest. Next up, we have the Longbeards with Great Axe, identical to the Hammerers, but the crit does 1 less damage. This has the same ability as the Old Guard, which I think is probably a little bit better than Hammerers. All of the things we've said about those strength boosts still apply, and frustratingly, this does say others, so you can't use it to boost the acting fighter. It just boosts everybody else. But yeah, if you had 2 or 3 of these all stacking on each other, you could be able to pump up that strength to something that maybe might make a difference. Again, very, very situational. It depends what you're dealing with. We're back to the Longbeards, but this time with Axe and Shield. 5 points less, losing 1 average damage, and gaining a point of toughness. Now, losing that point of strength might actually make all the strength bonuses within the warband a little bit better. That 5 toughness is going to make it hard to shift, and we still have the same back in my day ability, so we're going to be adding 1 strength to nearby fighters, which can be useful depending on the situation. The Ironbreakers are 5 points cheaper again. Damage down another point to 2, which is still pretty good for the points, but still slow with that 3 move. The ability might be a way to make up for that. Ironbreakers can both use the ability and can be a target for the ability. Unfortunately, they can't move after that, but you can have 1 double move and then get dragged after that for another double move. Honestly, the ability isn't amazing, but you will get some use out of it, and because movement is a kind of a challenge for this warband, it's definitely worth looking at. Mostly though, this is the cheapest chunky boy that you can get in the warband. Alright, so what do we have? Personally, I don't think there's a lot happening with this warband. There are a few heroes like the Warden King, Runelord, and Keeper of the Gate who do look good. Nothing fancy, but just decent profiles with that Short King discount for the 3 movement. I do think the Longbeards are a little too expensive to be called chaff, but Grim Last Stand is going to make them really hard to kill, and Over My Dead Body is going to help them hold objectives. The same can be said for the Armbreakers, who trade some of that damage for a decent movement ability, which again, as I said, could be important. Choice of allies is probably going to be key here. While the Duardin are holding the ground, having something like the Medusa who can do a ton of damage and delete problems might be good. Alternatively, Kaltia, of course, with her movement ability, could be a nice way to shore up the weakness of the warband. Kixi Taka is similar. He's got a nice movement ability. I haven't been able to find any one hero in particular that synergizes with this warband well, but the warband itself, with the Ironbreakers holding the ground and just being tough as nails and hard to kill, are forming a kind of a base all by itself. And the fact that they can use Over My Dead Body to almost become a swarm list when it comes to actually holding objectives is pretty good. Although, as we can kind of see, they are very hungry for doubles. I think to a certain extent that this warband is only half formed. Not every kit made it across from the old world into Age of Sigmar for Dwarfs. So we are missing things like the crossbow and gun lines, the rangers, and the miners. They also lost the slayers into the Fire Slayers faction. There is something wholesome, though, about fielding dwarfs with shields who refuse to die. We should see the models getting re-released in the next few months, so I think that it probably now is a good opportunity to consider picking up a dwarf warband. They obviously excel at objective missions, but that's been the meta for a long while now. So I do think it is something that they could do really well with. A few carefully placed doubles effectively turn this warband into a swarm list, but they're much harder to kill. And with those extra boosts from Over My Dead Body floating to where they're needed rather than where your opponent expects it. Compared to a swarm list, if you've got the doubles, you can adjust the board on the fly to get those extra bonuses. I do think that this warband is definitely worth trying out, especially as picking up a character like the Warden King and a box of plastic iron breakers is probably going to be relatively cheap and give you everything you need to really actually enjoy the warband. I do think obviously you're going to need to include an ally of some sort, but if you're playing Warcry already, you probably have a good chunk of options. There are also a few nice third-party options, like the Oathmark's plastic boxes look quite good. And I have to admit, I've been very tempted by the Highland Miniatures range. They have some great Sons of Ymir dwarf STL floating around. Anyway, that's everything I've got for this warband. Hope you enjoyed this look at it. And we'll see what new miniatures come out for it, or what old new miniatures come out for it once the old work kicks off, and we have an opportunity to field this Warcry warband again. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.